You know, we hear the term endangered species thrown around all the time. But what's really being done to stop extinction? Well, the story of the global fight to save life on our planet, it's a complicated one. It's a story that starts with some pretty shocking loss, but it also leads to these huge global agreements and powerful national laws. And ultimately, it forces us to ask some really, really tough questions. Okay, let's just start with one number, a really powerful one. Back in 1900, there were an estimated 100,000 tigers out there in the wild. I mean, just try to picture that. 100,000. It's a number that's almost impossible to wrap your head around today. And here's where we are today, just 3,900. From 100,000 down to less than 4,000. I mean, that is just a staggering drop. It hits you right away with the sheer scale of the problem we're up against. So the big question is, how did this happen? So what was behind this massive collapse? Well, it's a pretty brutal combination. A whopping 90% of their habitat has just vanished. And on top of that, you've got widespread poaching. It was a total recipe for disaster. But, and this is important, there is a glimmer of hope here. In a few places, India, Nepal, Russia, the conservation efforts are actually starting to work. It proves that this isn't a lost cause. The decline can be stopped. Okay, so a story as shocking as the tigers is exactly what pushed the world to act. It became super clear that individual countries couldn't solve this alone. If you wanted to protect wildlife, you needed a global rulebook, a way for everyone to get on the same page to protect species no matter what border they crossed. So the first big player to step onto the stage was CITES back in 1975. And its big idea, the real game changer, was to go after the trade in endangered species. The thinking was, if we can shut down the international market for things like ivory, rhino horns, or tiger skins, we can cut off the financial incentive for poaching. A really smart approach. And CITES is a perfect example of how these big international deals work in the real world. I mean, on the one hand, it's been a huge success, right? You've got 183 countries on board. It's protecting literally tens of thousands of species. And it's made everyone more aware of poaching. But, and there's always a but, its power only goes so far. Enforcement can be really spotty depending on the country. The fines? Sometimes they're laughably small. And get this, countries can actually just exempt themselves from protecting a certain species if they want to. So it's got teeth, but not everywhere. All right, so after CITES, we have the other major treaty, the Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD. Now this one comes at the problem from a totally different angle. Instead of zeroing in on one species and the trade surrounding it, the CBD zooms out. It's all about the big picture, protecting entire ecosystems and stopping the overall loss of biodiversity. Yeah, this table lays it out pretty clearly. You can see CITES is like a sniper rifle. It's aimed squarely at the trade of specific species. The CBD, on the other hand, is more like a wide-angle lens, looking at whole ecosystems. But check out that last row, because it's a really big deal. The US is on board with CITES, but it hasn't ratified the CBD. And that just goes to show you how politically tricky these global conservation efforts can get. So we've got these big global rulebooks, but what does that actually look like on the ground? How does an international treaty turn into real action? Well, let's zoom in now and see how national laws and protected lands make all the difference. And we're going to start with what might be one of the most powerful environmental laws ever created. I'm talking about the U.S. Endangered Species Act, the ESA. It was passed back in '73, and people often call it the gold standard for this kind of legislation. And its mission is both simple and incredibly ambitious. Find the species that are in trouble, give them protection, and then most importantly, create a plan to help them recover and get them back from the brink. So the big question is, does it actually work? Well, this chart tells a pretty amazing story. A 99% success rate at preventing extinction, that is just incredible. Now, you'll see the number of species that have fully recovered is still pretty small. But here's the key. More than half of them are either stable or actually improving, and that's huge. Recovery takes a long, long time, but the ESA is absolutely succeeding at its number one job, stopping the bleeding. It's preventing extinction. But like anything this powerful, it's definitely got its controversies. On one side, you have supporters who say, look, recovery can take decades. The fact that so many species are stable is a massive victory. But then you have critics on the other side. They point to that low number of fully recovered species and say it's an expensive failure.
And they also argue that it puts the rights of animals over the rights of people, especially landowners. It's a really intense debate, and frankly, both sides make some pretty strong points.
It's not just about laws, though. Another crucial piece of the puzzle is just setting land aside, creating safe havens. And this idea goes way back to 1903 with President Teddy Roosevelt. He created the very first national wildlife refuge, all to protect the brown pelican. And look at where we are today. That one little refuge has exploded into this huge network of 567 protected sanctuaries all across the country. Okay, so we've got laws and we've got protected lands. But these days, conservation is also super high-tech. It leans heavily on science and technology. And this is where things get really cool, where we see scientists getting hands-on to give these species a real fighting chance. I love this part. It's basically CSI for the animal kingdom. Seriously, these wildlife forensics labs get evidence from a poaching scene, bones, hair, tissue, and they use all the cool tools like DNA analysis and toxicology to figure out what happened. They answer the key questions. What species is this? How did it die? And who did it? And their work isn't just for solving a puzzle. It becomes the cold, hard evidence that's used in court to put wildlife criminals behind bars. And this quote just nails it. This isn't just about biology, it's about justice. These scientists are the crucial link that connects the crime to the criminal. They provide the rock-solid proof you need to make sure these conservation laws actually have teeth. But what happens when a species is on the absolute edge? When their habitat is gone or their numbers are so low they can't recover on their own? Well, that's when we turn to captive breeding. You can think of zoos and aquariums as becoming a kind of Noah's Ark or an ER for an entire species. And the toolbox they have is incredible. They do things like egg pulling, where they'll take eggs from the wild and hatch them in a safe place. They use high-tech stuff like artificial insemination and even embryo transfers. They even use DNA analysis to act as matchmakers, making sure there's enough genetic diversity. And when it works big. Just look at the California condor. It was down to just 22 birds in the entire world. 22. And these programs brought it back from the absolute brink. But let's be real, captive breeding is incredibly tough. It's a huge challenge because you need a lot of animals to make it work. Just to have a stable group in captivity, you're talking hundreds of individuals. For real long-term genetic health, where the species could evolve and adapt, you might need more than 10,000. And the simple reality is, zoos just don't have the space or the money to do that for every single species that needs help.
And it's not just about animals either. There's a parallel strategy for plants, kind of a last resort, just like captive breeding. We're talking about seed banks. They're like a global insurance policy. You've probably heard of the most famous one, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, way up in the Arctic. It's basically a doomsday vault, built to survive anything, that stores the genetic blueprints for billions of seeds, keeping them safe for the future. So when you put it all together, the global treaties, the powerful laws, the amazing science, it all leads us to a really difficult crossroads. Because the hard truth is, we have limited time and limited money. We can't save everything. And that forces us, and conservationists, to make some incredibly tough choices. And these are the questions that keep conservationists up at night. What do you focus on? A single, famous species, or the entire ecosystem? Do you put your limited cash towards the animal that's closest to vanishing forever, or a keystone species whose disappearance would bring the whole ecosystem crashing down? And what about the popularity contest? Do you focus on the cute, cuddly panda because it raises a ton of money, or do you focus on some ugly but critically important insect? I mean, there are just no easy answers to any of these.
This quote just hits the nail on the head. For the people doing this work every day, conservation isn't just about loving animals. It's about triage, like in an emergency room. They have to decide who gets priority because the resources just aren't there for everyone. It's a constant, brutal calculation of where a dollar or an hour of work will have the biggest impact.
And that really brings us to the final and maybe the most profound question of all. When you know you can't save everything, how do you decide? How do we decide which life is worth saving? It's a question that's bigger than science, bigger than politics. It really forces all of us to think about our own values and what kind of world we want to leave behind.